right again. I've come back to you now. If you've seen part 1, this is going to be part 2, and now I'll tell you a bit about Alfie and what happened to him on that day, from what we found out of his mates when they came back from the prison camp, and his officer got took prisoner, and he'd come and seen every one of the wives of his men who died and told them, to his best knowledge, what happened to him. So yeah, so basically, well, what I did is, when I come back from this thing, I kind of wrote down I read this book, and I kind of wrote something down. So I'll just actually read it, what I wrote down. That's what that little poem thing came out of, what I just read before in part 1. So yeah. Right. Oh yeah, let me show you this first. This is because I want you to see these people. These are 2 young monks out of the 6. This is a guy called Colonel Elstob. He's the commanding officer at the Manchester Regiment, 16th Pals Battalion. He died on Manchester Hill with the remnants of his men, and he was awarded the VC. Yeah, so it was that kind of day, if you can imagine what it was like. It must have been off. Get my computer there, put that on there. Right. The early morning hours of March the 21st, 1918 were about to get very interesting for some people and very deadly for many others. As the cold dark night began to give way to the first light of the new day, the lads and men from 26 Manchester Regiment continued to try to make the best of their circumstances and get some precious last minutes of slumber. There was no breakfast in bed or any other comforts to be had for these boys, and as they began to come out of what passed for a night's sleep down in the mud, and rat-infested dugouts and bunkers, many would have coughed and wheezed and turned over in the makeshift wooden bunks as they tried to hang on to their dreams of home, or for many, maybe to try and break free from their, no doubt, terror-filled nightmares. 32-year-old father of 4 children, Lance Corporal Alfred Ryder, military medal 303395, could well have been kept awake as he worried about his recent promotion to acting corporal. A couple of the lads in his section were teenage replacements, and this was the first time on active service. Alfred knew it was his job to keep these boys alive long enough to learn the ropes. This step up in responsibility had come about due to the very grave losses suffered by the 26th and their sister battalion 28 Manchester Regiment during the latter half of 1917 in the Ypres sector of the Somme. When the 2 Manchester battalions had finally come out from the blood-filled trenches, the carnage inflicted on them had been so severe that the authorities had decided to amalgamate the 2 battalions and concentrate the not so many fortunate survivors from the clash of arms into one single 800-man battalion. In the Second Battle of Ypres, Alfred had been a very lucky man, as the conveyor belt of German artillery shells had crashed into the 2nd 28 Manchester Regiment positions. The telephone wire communications line had been cut, and the junior officers who commanded the battle from the sharp end needed to let the senior commanders know, who were located several hundred yards further to the rear, what was going on. I'm sorry about this, I'm just getting this up. Right, let's see. Should just... Yeah, I'll get to the second page. Alfred had volunteered to leave the comparative safety of his trench and dodge the machine gun bursts, targeted sniper fire and large calibre cast iron showers of shrapnel to deliver the handwritten messages. My mother's granddad must have been pretty springer as he jumped from shell hole to collapsed trench, and he definitely must have possessed a good timing ability for his actions on that day. Alfred was awarded the military medal for his brave deeds near the French village of Paul-Capel. The days filled with death dragged on, and not long after the above-mentioned event, the Germans decided to engage the Manchesters with their weapons of mass destruction. The early morning birdsong was interrupted when the Kaiser's artillery batteries began to fire shells with all manner of noxious gases into the lads from Colliest and Hume and every other area of the great commercial city. Alfred's luck finally ran out that day, and he was gassed. Alfred was taken at the rear, and after spending several days in the field hospital, the lucky to be alive Lance Corporal Ryder was repatriated back home to England to convalesce before being sent home to New Cross for a spell of well-deserved leave. Julia Ryder, née Dolan, had been overjoyed and more than a little relieved when the love of her life had returned to the family home on Kemp Street. It had been hard enough for her to have to worry about the welfare of her older brother Edward when he had sailed off to South Africa with the Manchesters to participate in the Boer War, and the disquiet that continued when Eddie had been posted up to the northwest frontier of India to keep the order between the Muslim warlords up in the tribal areas that straddle the border with Afghanistan. In public, Julia gave her brother the full support, but in private she felt Edward had no business going to the other side of the world to have fighting with those ferocious Pathan warriors. I've done a bit of artistic license there. I'll say artistic, in commas. Right. The new war that had begun in 1914 was a bloody affair that pitted 19th century Napoleonic campaign tactics against 20th century industrial scale killing machines. The conflict was like no other feud between nations that had came before it. The city of Manchester had set the record for being the largest infantry regiment in the British Army, where it provided up to 26 800-man plus infantry battalions for service in that Great War. Most of the lads serving in these formations had never been further away from their homes than Blackpool, and here they were now spread around the globe from Gallipoli to Gaza. There had been a good reason when the local inhabitants of Prussia Street area of Ancoats had of late started referring to those tough streets as the Dardanelles. The Manchester Regiment alone had contributed 7 infantry battalions to that not well thought out campaign, and during that long hot summer of 1915, the Manchester lads had made the deepest penetration into the Turkish defence system when they attacked and reached the third line of trenches manned by the German officered Ottoman Empire troops. I had another great granddad, it was William Connor, who died at Gallipoli. He was badly wounded at Gallipoli with the Lancashire Fusiliers, and he came back to England anyway. Died up in the north. He's buried up there. I think I spoke about him the other day. Get back to this. Julia had been horrified as her friends and neighbours had all too frequently begun to inform her about their own recent family bereavements. Every family from all the 4 corners of Manchester had lost somebody, and after nearly 4 years, there still seemed no end to the catastrophic human damage being inflicted on the close-knit communities of the city. Alfred had been filled with a great amount of cheerfulness when he had arrived home, and had last been able to pick up and hold on tight to his 4 children: Julia, aged 13, Alfred, 10, Christopher, my granddad, aged 6, and new baby Dorothy, aged 6 months. The delight that Alfred must have been feeling was also tempered by the knowledge that he would soon have to make up his mind regarding the issue of whether or not he should leave his precious family and return to his nearly as dear to himself good mates and colleagues back in his regiment. Alfred had recently been informed by the powers that be that it does bit and he would be excused from any further participation in the Great War with his head held high. Of course, Alfred wanted to go back to France, and that was fine, and he could return to his regiment in the new year. The big news of the moment around the tenements and dwellings that bordered the Great Ancoats Street and Oldham area had been the sudden and unexpected termination of hostilities between the Russian Empire, Germany, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. There was an opinion held by many that suggested that the war may be over in weeks. Many of the few remaining optimists in the area began to cling to this hope that the news would bring about an honourable end to this war to end all wars. The former railway employee knew that he needed to provide for his family, and he was almost certain he would return to his job as a luggage porter on exchange station down on Deansgate. The choice must have played out over and over in Alfred's mind, and when he finally made his decision, it was to return to the blood-soaked fields of northern France. Julia took his news about Alfred's return to the war as best she could. The tough-looking, though very gentle housewife had been feeling mortified when her husband informed her of his decision, but Alfred had a strong sense of duty to his country. He made up his mind, and that was that. With 4 children to care for, Julia had her hands full. Over the last couple of years, a second son, yes, On the morning of Alfred's departure for France, Julia had roused from her deep sleep, feeling immense sadness. She must have done. This sense of heavy-hearted sorrow was a sentiment also shared by Alfred and the children. The journey to Central Station had been an all too short walk, filled with the usual buoyant chatter, but this false cheerfulness had found an accompaniment in the long seconds' uncomfortable silence that had wrapped a shroud around the real thought behind the conversation. Julia gripped hold of Alfred and held on to him in an embrace from which she never wanted to let go. Only the pulling on his tunic from the children allowed the tearful father to move himself away from his sobbing wife and pick up his kids for one last twirl. The keen-eyed provost that was standing nearby gave Alfred a look that reminded him it was time to board the train. "Your country needs you, Lance Corporal Alfred Ryder, MM." At the beginning of February, I'm not going to read it. I'll just bore you. You know what I mean, with it all and all. Okay, let me get to this. I'll just tell you anyway. Basically, what happened on that morning is they was roused very early. They didn't get time for breakfast. They was pushed up into the trenches. It was foggy. You couldn't see 10 foot in front of you. The battalion next to it, I think was the 4th Lancashire Fusiliers. The next thing you know, there's all hell let loose, shells, false machine guns, all that you've heard about them shooting out of the fog. I think it took about 3 minutes for the Lancashire Fusiliers to get overwhelmed, and like there was either all killed, whatever. It was just on them in minutes. It was the same with these lot. So the Manchesters held they held the position, but they'd never seen anything. There was thousands of these Germans round them and bayonets and all sorts. So anyway, the survivors was taken prisoner, and this is what we found out from his friends when they came back and his officer. But Alfred tried to escape, and there was some big rocks there, and he was hiding behind a rock, and he won't come out. And the Germans was asking him to come out. And he won't come out anyway. I don't know. You don't know. Maybe he's just got his 4 kids and wants to come home. But well, they threw an hand grenade anyway, around the back of the rock, and it blew him out. So that was that. And yeah. And then he died. The Germans did. I mean, they told me, Gran. I remembered my auntie telling me this. Doris, she told me a few times. They gave him water, so he was still alive after he got hand grenaded. And yeah, and then he died. And we don't know where he's buried, but he's still over there. So anyway, we're just remembering him. You know, we're just remembering him today, 21st of March. It's 102 years, and all the people who died in that war on all the sides. No more white brother wars in it. You know, there's enough people out there. You know, if someone comes to take ours, we fight them. Otherwise, leave them to it. You know what I mean? And we just get on with us. No more brothers wars. And thank you for listening.